met again in Brussels to discuss the ongoing crisis in Ukraine. With Russian personnel on the ground in the country, Vladimir Putin has been warned what he faces by his European counterparts should he not withdraw those troops.
I think the situation is worsening. Russia in open and direct involvement in and is at stage of war against Ukraine, and it is clear that means against country who wants to be closer to Europe. That means Russia is practically in the war against Europe.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has warned that political ambitions could threaten peace in Europe. Putin was paying tribute to Russia's fallen soldiers on the 100th anniversary of the beginning of World War I. He said it is important to remember how excessive ambitions and political interests triggered World War I in order to avoid new conflicts.
Amongst the long lists of foreign policy failures and contradictions in the last few years, including of course the bombing of Libya, the desire to arm the rebels in Syria, has been the unnecessary provocation of Vladimir Putin. This EU empire, ever seeking to expand, stated its territorial claim on the Ukraine some years ago. Just to make that worse, of course, some NATO members said they too would like the Ukraine to join NATO. We directly encouraged the uprising in the Ukraine that led to the toppling of the President Yanukovych, and that led, of course, in turn to Vladimir Putin reacting.
In the contested Ukrainian city of Donetsk, the evidence of yet more heavy shelling is everywhere. The casualties in this latest round of violence, at least 15 civilians, their bodies scattered indiscriminately. The attack in the rebel-held city took place as evidence mounted of a Russian military incursion into Ukraine. This tank, says Kiev, belongs to Russia. Officials say it was spotted near the eastern town of Novoazovsk.
President Saakashvili was the president of the Republic of Georgia, and in 2008, the republic launched a campaign to regain control of its two breakaway provinces, South Ossetia and Abkhazia. But the Russians intervened. They sent in the tanks, and they intervened on the side of the Russian rebels who prevented Georgia from gaining their authority back.
Live from America's News Headquarters, I'm Kelly Wright. Good morning. A provocative incident between the U.S. and Russia. U.S. fighter jets have intercepted Russian military planes off the western coast of Alaska. The American jets were scrambled into action when the Russian planes came within 55 miles of Alaska.
We're getting reports that 5 civilians have been killed in the eastern Ukrainian city of Lugansk, one of the hubs of anti-Kiev resistance and a main target of the Ukrainian military. Now, these are the pictures we're getting from the city. They apparently show a large residential building being hit by a shell. Local officials are claiming many other houses were damaged as well.
NATO Brigadier General Niko Tok says more than 1,000 Russian troops are in Ukraine.
The satellite images released today provide additional evidence that Russian combat soldiers equipped with sophisticated heavy weaponry are operating inside Ukraine's sovereign territory.
Over 2,000 British and Polish soldiers have been taking part in joint military exercises in West Poland. The training, named Black Eagle, is the largest armoured deployment in Eastern Europe for 6 years.
For us, most important during this Black Eagle exercise, Black Eagle training, was to train my staff, my headquarters, as well as my troops, to be ready to operate within the other allied force. We train using the same procedures, the NATO one, of course.
UK military chiefs were enthusiastic about the joint drills held by the two NATO allies, which also included over 300 military vehicles.
Here we go. More disaster across the world. Now, Russia had been supporting pro-Russian separatists in Ukraine. Now, Russia already took Crimea. Then they went into eastern and southern Ukraine. Now, I say they went in because the estimates are they have about 1,000 to 1,600 troops that are specifically Russian troops already inside Ukraine.
Vladimir Vladimirovich, How do you view the future of Europe in 5 or maybe 10 years? Will we finally live in Europe from the Atlantic to the Pacific, or in 2 separated Europes? Let me say, there are no contradictions with my previous Valdai speech. The point is that the Russian peculiarities do not fundamentally or principally differ from the European values. All of us are citizens of the world. For sure, we are different. Each of us has his or her own differences. But the core values remain unchanged. And I think, as I have already said a great many times before and also today, we should certainly strive for establishment of a new Europe to be expanded from Lisbon to Vladivostok.
Putin is not going to stop. It was South Ossetia first, it's Crimea next, it's eastern and southern Ukraine now, and tomorrow it will be more areas in former Soviet countries.
Ambassador to the OSCE, Ihor Prokopchuk, went a step further.
The Russian regular forces, the units of the Russian regular forces, entered and took control of the city of Novoazovsk and also a number of other villages around this city.
The tragedy reminds us of what aggression and selfishness, excessive ambitions of state leaders and political elites can lead to. Violence breeds violence, and the way to peace and prosperity is made through goodwill and dialogue.
Putin said Russia has always sought peace, but that it would repel any outside attack. The comments come as Russia and the West are locked in a war of words over the crisis in Ukraine. The West accuses Russia of destabilizing eastern Ukraine, but Moscow denies any involvement.
Now, Ukraine's gone 3 months now without paying for gas, raising fears that if it were cut off, it could start siphoning off from pipes crossing to Europe. And the Russian president personally called on EU leaders to address the problem before it all comes to a head. RT's Medina Kochanova reports.
Vladimir Putin has sent a warning to European buyers of Russian gas that Ukraine's debt crisis has reached a critical stage.
According to the current contract, Gazprom will now have to switch to an advanced payment system and, in the event of arrears, may be forced to cut deliveries. In other words, it will deliver as much gas as Ukraine pays for a month ahead.
How worried should Europe be? Quite a bit, considering previous examples. Ukraine has failed to deliver in its gas transit deals a number of times in the past, proving to be an unreliable partner.
And the moral of the story is if you poke the Russian bear with a stick, don't be surprised when he reacts.
Almost half of its Russian gas imports via Ukraine and therefore is vulnerable to any disruptions. In 2006, the pipes were turned off when Ukraine did not pay its gas obligations to Russia, leaving half of Europe in the cold. Kiev failed to pay again in the winter of 2008 and 2009, bringing another freeze as gas supplies were halted again, just as demand was at its peak.
Now, just to continue with that, today we are rushing through an association agreement at undue speed with the Ukraine, and as we speak, there are NATO soldiers engaged in military exercises in the Ukraine. Have we taken leave of our senses? Do we actually want to have a war with Putin? Because if we do, we're certainly going about it the right way.
It was 6 Russian planes all flying together, 2 Russian Bear long-range bombers, 2 Russian refueling tankers, and 2 Russian MiG fighter jets. With the fighter jets in particular, that is the sort of collection of Russian firepower that the U.S. military says it hasn't seen flying that close to the U.S. since the Cold War.
What I said yesterday is that the claims by President Putin and other Russians that they had to go into Crimea and maybe further into eastern Ukraine because they had to protect the Russian minorities. And that is reminiscent of claims that were made back in the 1930s when Germany, under the Nazis, kept talking about how they had to protect German minorities in Poland, in Czechoslovakia, and elsewhere throughout Europe.
Perhaps we ought to recognise that the West now faces the biggest threat and crisis to our way of life that we have seen for over 70 years. The recent beheadings of the British and American hostages graphically illustrates the problem. And of course we have our own citizens from our own countries engaged in that struggle too.
Very startling announcement from NATO today, Wolf, that they are concerned about some stepped up Russian air activity over European airspace where thousands of commercial airliners fly. Let me put up a map for a minute and just let's leave it up there and walk through what is happening between NATO and the Russians. Over the last 2 days, NATO has monitored an increased number of Russian flights. They have been over the North Atlantic, the Balkans, the Baltic, and to the east in the Black Sea. A number of European air forces have responded. They are intercepting these flights. They are generally Russian Bear bombers with refueling aircraft in groups of 8.
There was a strike on the city, most likely from Grad rocket systems. There is a very popular supermarket in the city centre. When the shell fell onto it, there were a lot of customers there. Another fell in a residential yard and another near the city's maternity home, causing all the windows to blow out. Explosions could be heard all through the day, starting from 4 in the morning. They are simply razing us to the ground.
In the war against Islamic extremism, Vladimir Putin, whatever we may think of him as a human being, is actually on our side. I suggest we grow up. I suggest we recognise the real threat facing all of our countries, communities and societies. We stop playing war games in the Ukraine and we start to prepare a plan to help countries like Syria, like Iraq, like Kenya, like indeed Nigeria, to try and help them to deal with the real threat that faces us. Let's not go on provoking Putin, whether we like him or not.